Hi, this is Francisco Pulgar Viral with fkiQuality. Today I would like to give an overview of the Six Sigma method, which is based on the DMAIC approach or methodology. DMAIC stands for Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control. And it is a way of solving problems and continually improving operations based on the scientific method. The first stage of the methodology, Define, is one where we will try to determine the need for running a project in response to an issue, something that should be important, should be material to the organization. Typically, the issues are going to be based or started with some type of financial challenge or a financial issue that should justify the need for a project. The type of thing that we may think about would be high cost of overtime, high cost of inventory, too many refunds, high cost of rework, etc. And one of the things we're going to try to do is to connect these various financial issues with if these are the financial issues, connect them with the process or the operational issues first, and then these ones, as we analyze the operations, connect them with the different processes that we may actually have to fix. Now, when we are at this level is where we will be looking at what type of ailments, what type of diseases these processes, these operations may incur. And so here we will likely find that we're going to be talking about operations which are slow, rigid, defective, and also obscure. And we will be measuring this, and we will be analyzing the context in which all of this occurs. The context which is given by the process map. And in particular, we're going to be using a methodology or a way of mapping process called SIPOC that tells us from a high viewpoint, how a process looks like, and also it allows to see us in its context. That is, by looking at the inputs that go into an operation, into a process, how they come out as outputs, and then the suppliers of these inputs, which may, once analyzed, they may shed some light as to why is it that we're having some trouble, and the customers, which will tell us quite objectively where is it that our operation is faltering or where is it that it is not doing very well. And we will measure all of this using the notion of, in connection with the voice of the customer, the notion of what is known as a CTQ, or a critical to quality variable. And this is what we need to determine and identify how much of a gap there is between what we want and what we're getting, and that will lead us to the definition from a pretty well-balanced point of view of a project, which will then result in a project charter. The next stage of the methodology is the measure stage. The main purpose of the measure stage is to identify a baseline. That is, how are we doing? How serious is the problem? Where is it really happening? How many of our product lines is impacting? How many of our customer segments is impacting? In order to understand this fully, we need to go to the place where the work is happening. We know that as a Japanese term that we use called Gemba, or just the place of work. At the Gemba, we can listen to two, if you would, voices. Sometimes people call them like that. That will be the voice of the process itself, with all its various difficulties and challenges, but also the voice of the employee, which should tell us with sincerity what is actually happening. If you launch a project correctly, and you create trust with the various individuals who are impacted by the problems that you're trying to solve, then the voice of the employee is something that should come out pretty naturally. As an outcome of a Gemba visit, this is where you can also identify all the various forms of waste. And in particular, we talk about the 8 wastes of lean. In addition to this, the purpose of the measure stage is to help us determine what is going on from a more numerical point of view. And so we may have to look at some measures of the performance of a process, such as the processing times, the lead times, value-added times, process cycle efficiency, and other measures which will allow us to determine how well our process is performing. But very importantly, in addition to this, we also need to apply some concepts of statistical process control. And what this means is the use of control charts in order to determine the stability. How stable is the process that we are dealing with? Because absent stability, improvement is impossible, or it's just a fallacy, because you will be improving on something that could change, could shift on you at any moment, at any time. Once we determine the stability of a process by identifying special causes of variation and countering those causes of variation, then we can attempt to identify the capability of a process. And in terms of the capability of a process, here is where you have traditional measures such as the yield of a process and things such as the sigma of a process and the defects per million opportunities of a process. With this, we can create a picture that has both angles. On one hand, we see the work as it is happening, as closely as possible to its source, and then we map it by making the workflow visible, which already is a major achievement, because making things visible helps us have a common view of things, a graphical representation of the work, which then allows for discussion and improvement. That's the first part. And then the second part is the numerical part, which obviously complements the first one. And in between the two, we can get an impression as to how well the process is going, and also, and importantly, how stable it is, so that then we may determine how capable it is. Understanding that capability is to what degree a process is actually able to satisfy and to meet the requirements of its customers. The third stage of the methodology is analyze. The purpose of analyze is to connect the dots, if you would. And what we can say is that the dots that we want to connect are the relationships between the effects that we can see, which are measurable. And this is why we describe them in the measure stage. But how are these connected with the actual causes? And not just any causes, but the root causes, right? These are the really ones, the ones that are really going to help us identify what's going on. One thing that is very important that we get from the Deming approach to management is to make sure that we go beyond the question of who is at fault. So the question of who is something that really focuses on the person. Instead of this, we need to ask the question of why. Why is it that we are having the problems that we're having? In fact, the methodology even says as why 5 times, as in recognizing that if we only ask why once or twice, we may just get an answer that is very shallow, or is incorrect, or is incomplete. And so this, combined with the notion, with the techniques of brainstorming, allows us to then have a good inquiry, a good discovery of what's going on. All of this would lead to the creation of one of the most important thinking tools that we have, which is known as the fishbone diagram, also known as the Ishikawa diagram or the cause-effect diagram. The fishbone diagram, opens our minds to consider all the various factors that may be part of what we see. These effects, what are they really due to? And so it allows us to question different aspects of a system of production, such as the materials and information and the equipment and the procedures and how we measure things and what type of environment have we created in the place of work, all of which may have an impact on our end result. Deming tells us that these elements, the ones that I just mentioned, which are part of the system of production, can very well represent the largest proportion of the possible causes. So what we have is a system of production which, from the point of view of the fishbone diagram, could also be called a system of causes, which represent what is known as the common causes. And these common causes account for about 94%, or at least a very high percentage of the reasons, but also the opportunities for problems. And the special causes, which could be one particular worker or a particular situation, account for a much smaller proportion of causes. And so if we really want to be able to make a change that is meaningful, we need to work on the system of production, the system of causes, in order to address these ones, which will allow us to take care of the majority of the things that are happening. This identification of the root causes then will be a solid foundation over which we can begin to build a set of countermeasures or a solution to the problem that we identified in the defined stage. The fourth stage of the methodology is called improve. The purpose of improve is that now that we have identified the root causes of the problems that we have, now we need to counter them. Now, in order to actually be effective, we need to consider that the type of problems that we will encounter, especially if they have certain amount of complexity or if they touch on different organizations or different teams, likely will not be solve with just one thing. And so we need to have a systemic view of our solution. And this, in many cases, is going to mean that we need three different new things. We need a different process, a different organization, and also a different technology. These three together then have a chance at really creating what we need, which is a better way of working. The process will likely be connected with new facilities, new layouts. The organization will likely consider the new culture. What is it that we need to have in our heads, in our minds, in order to effectively do the new processes with high performance? Plus, how do we redefine our roles and responsibilities, and how we connect with one another in a collaborative way, keeping the end-to-end view of our work? Plus, what type of skills do we need in order to be effective at doing these new tasks? So process and organizations are tightly connected. And of course, technology enables everything. It can be information technology, but it can be any type of technology that is more specific to what you do. In a warehouse, maybe a different type of shelving system, a different type of storage and retrieval system, and so on. So this is sort of like a systemic view, which is really important. Now, in addition to this, there are certain organizational changes that we would like to implement in order to have a solution that also is responsive. And so we need to create a sense of operational awareness. How well are we doing? This is what Toyota calls jidoka, so an organizational awareness, which also corresponds to one of the pillars of Lean, which is the notion of automation. How do we create an organization, teams, but also machines that can tell when they are doing something wrong or about to make a mistake, and then stop themselves and fix them if at all possible? And the other important aspect of this, our methodology for improvement, is that in order to make the change easier and to make the change more accessible and faster, It also advocates the idea of multiple small improvements using the method for change called PDSA, which is Plan, Do, Study, Act. This is also known as the Deming cycle, or the cycle of continuous improvement, which allows us to make multiple incremental changes in order to get to a next stage, to a new target, by means of smaller and continual discoveries. This part of the methodology now has become very famous now in 2018 and since for at least a couple of years, under the name of the KATA methodology. The fifth and last stage of the methodology is the controlled stage. In the controlled stage, we're going to put in place all the various things that we can in order to make sure that the solution that we have worked so hard to produce will be sustained, will not unravel. So a couple of things here. The first one would be to understand how are we going to measure this. So the CTQs that we had identified in the measure stage should now come back and help us make sure that we sustain the process within the right ranges of capability, but also stability. So we will continue to use, over the long term, elements of statistical process control in order to continuously monitor and respond, monitor the performance, and respond with any countermeasures that may be necessary in order to address the issues, whether or not what we see here is a special cause of variation or common causes of variation. In addition to this, we also want to make sure that we can sustain daily. And what this means is that we need to be able to understand that the notion that part of the work is to improve the work. So everybody should recognize that the ability to sustain at a high level of performance is going to be challenged on a continual basis. That's just the nature of variability in business and in life, really. So we need to be able to understand that part of the job is going to be to put the efforts necessary and the time to reflect necessary in order to improve the job and take small measures. It will not take all of the make, of course, but it will take a quick response so that we maintain our operation within the right ranges of acceptable and also satisfactory performance. What this also entails is that there is a degree of trust between everybody in the organization so that an employee can speak to their supervisor, bringing up problems. One of the things that we learn from the world of lean is that no problem is a problem. So that if somebody always says that everything is just going fine, this person probably is missing an opportunity to identify problems, which then will lead to deteriorating performance of the Gemba, of the operation, and then will create even larger problems. This concludes the presentation of a quick overview of the DMAIC approach to problem solving and continual improvement. Thank you for your time.